Whenever you have punctuation marks, especially the weird ones, start thinking about sentence structure. And semicolons and colons have nice, easy rules that we can think about. In order to use a semicolon, we need to have a complete sentence before the semicolon that could end with a period. Then we need to have a sentence afterwards that could also be on its own with a period and a capital letter. The colon is a little bit more free. We have to have a sentence beforehand, but afterwards we have some flexibility. We could have a sentence, we could have an extra clause, we could have a list. We have a lot of things that could happen. But let's take a look at the sentences and see how it sounds, and hopefully that will tell us what's going on. But oh my gosh, this is such a long sentence here, so hopefully we can hear it. Roughly 300 nights a year, when the cold air descending from the Andes Mountains meets the warm air rising from Venezuela's coastal Lake Maracaibo, the result is a spectacular lightning storm. Its strikes so bright, so localized, and so dependable. Well, that would be a weird place to stop, right? I'm purposely taking a long beat there, because if that's a pause, then I would just stop there. But it sounds like we're continuing, right? It strikes so bright, so localized, and so dependable that it has become known as Maracaibo's lighthouse. So that gets rid of both of these, because I think they both fail that first part where it's not a sentence. It just stops in the middle of the thought. Like, we've got to continue it. We don't need that break. And that kind of gets me to D, because that would also put a break there. It's less of a break. It's less of a pause, but it's still this kind of place where we would say there's some sort of separation between the words, but it feels like they need to go together. It strikes so bright, so localized, and so dependable that it has become known as Maracaibo's lighthouse. And honestly, this is a rule that kind of works in English if you're trying to memorize things about commas. The word that does not get commas, usually, okay? Now, with everything with commas in English, there's easy ways to make exceptions, because sentences can be complex and we can interrupt sentences kind of wherever we want. And so there might be cases where you do have a comma next to the word that, but you'd usually notice that you've got some sort of thing kind of interrupting or some weird thing happening. I don't feel like that's happening here. It just kind of continues. Now, that means, yeah, C is the answer, but I also want to point out right here, I would have had a big problem if that's where the blank was, okay? Because that comma right there before it's, I don't know, that I get why it's a comma, but I would want to maybe change the sentence around in some way. That feels like a very long sentence. That second part there seems kind of more like its own sentence. It's technically not, but it would be very, very difficult for me to accept that if that were where the blank is. So just be careful. It's not, we're focused on the blank, right? Like, that's the thing, is that's what matters. So we're really interested in the commas around that. We should think about how the other commas are working. Really what that comma there is doing after storm is adding on an extra clause. It is an extra clause that could not exist as its own sentence. So that's why it's got a comma there, not a semicolon or a colon. But I don't know, it's close. It's very close, and it's not a sentence that I would ever write. So that's what makes me nervous about it. But that's very common in the SAT. They give us stuff that we are not comfortable with, knowing that we will not have good instincts about it. So that's why we need to stick to the rules. And even though you don't use colons and semicolons in your own writing very often, they have clear rules. They're really great for us in the SAT because we know exactly what to check for, and we can usually see if something passes that test very quickly.